Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Here we are, it's the final session. Has everyone had a great show? Yeah, I don't think the people on this side have had a great show. Have you had a great show? Jolly good. Yes, they have. So what better topic on which to end than the topic of well-being? And I'm assured that this is going to be thought-provoking and, thought-provoking. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Tamsin and William.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? I know this space is a slightly interesting one. So welcome to today's session. My name's Tamsin Russell and I work at the Museums Association, and I'm really delighted to be here co-presenting with Will, and Will introduce himself very, very shortly. The focus today is on well-being, and when I was asked to come up with a title, I thought I'd go to this handy little meme that we see bandied around quite frequently. Now, I deliver lots of different workshops on well-being, but for most of my career, the focus has been on an individual level. And I decided that this workshop, or this session, is going to be different. So I want to introduce you to a number of different ideas around workforce well-being. And the first one is around the concept of person-environment fit. And the reason I'm highlighting this is that often when you go to sessions around well-being, there's an additional focus or burden on the individual within the situation. And I don't think that's helpful. Because imagine there's about 20 of us here in this space. You will all have different individual factors that will affect how you respond to a particular environment. The noise around here, the temperature, the light, all of those things. Yet a lot of the interventions focus very much on what you need to do to ensure that you fit into potentially a hostile environment. And I want to turn that narrative on its head. Because platitudes and memes do not help us address individual well-being situations. A lunchtime yoga session may well work for some of you, but it's not going to work for anyone. Now, I'm not dismissing that these particular interventions may well help, but what I want to start doing is holding organisations to account for this. We need to make sure that we change organisations' structures and cultures so that we ourselves are not having to think about how do we cope with those organisational issues. So while you're in the audience, as much as we will explore, to a degree, the individual factors that might affect your well-being, the bigger questions I want you to ask yourselves are, how do you change that culture? How do you make sure that the organisations you work in, the cultures that you participate and contribute to, are not the cultures that have a negative impact on well-being? So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by looking at a range of different things. So I'm going to give you some definitions. I'm going to give you some factors affecting individual well-being and factors affecting organisational culture. I'm going to hand over to Will. He's going to talk about a specific piece of research the Museums Association has undertaken in partnership with front of house museums. And I'm going to highlight the sticks and stones research the Museums Association has done into bullying in the sector. And why am I sharing you this research? I'm sharing this research because I think it's important that we all acknowledge that whilst our sector might look warm and fuzzy from the outside, the realities we face on a day-to-day basis are not always that warm and fuzzy. And right at the end, I'm going to challenge you to think about how we change this sector so this sector is committed to well-being honestly and openly. So, some definitions, guys. Well-being is a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. But what I would suggest is that within that, we all define well-being in our own way. It's important to acknowledge that everyone has well-being. So we don't just talk about it when it's not working, and we don't just talk about it when everything is going amazingly perfectly, when we're using perhaps social media to highlight how amazing everything is going. That's not always the case. It's really important to acknowledge that well-being is dynamic, it's changeable, it changes over time. So understanding the trends and patterns of your own well-being journey can really help you identify triggers or hooks or troughs that affect it. And well-being is the sum of its parts. So the focus on today's session is not about talking about you, but I will do in a minute. The focus primarily is talking about the sector, the environment in which we work, and that's where the two pieces of research come into play. So let's talk about personal difference and well-being. And you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to talk through every single bullet point on this slide. But it is important to acknowledge that whenever we are in a particular organisation, that we will bring our own values, lived experience, and other factors to play that may well have an impact on how we cope with that particular environment, that particular team or culture. This is why, with 4 people sitting in the second row, yes, I'm looking at you, that you may respond to particular situations differently. And that's that diversity of response based on these individual differences. And so it's sometimes important to understand what those individual differences are. In lots of workshops that I have delivered, I feel a little bit complicit in this, I tend to talk about coping and controlling mechanisms. So understanding that your well-being perhaps has been affected by a situation you've experienced, I have talked at length about how you can put in coping mechanisms to get you over that hump. I've talked about how you can put in controlling mechanisms to try and control your environment. But the issue for me here is that still placing the burden on you, when actually the burden and responsibility, the duty of care for creating a culture that is positive and supportive isn't on us, we participate in that, but is actually on the organisation. For those of you that think you're at the wrong talk, however, I do have some questions that you can reflect on. So, and all of these slides are available, so just drop me an email. So if I were to do a talk that placed the burden of your well-being on you, these would be the questions I would get you to answer. Because understanding your response is important, but not so it excuses the responsibility of the organisation. So what are those factors at an organisational level that affect your well-being? I love the Health and Safety Executive. I'm sure it's not a popular view, but it's one of my favourite organisations. And they've come up with a really lovely set of management standards associated primarily with stress, work-related stress, but can be applied to the concept of well-being. And they identify, with a rogue bullet point, demands, control, support, relationships, role and change. So we often, when we think about well-being, think about workload, and we often think about too much work. But the research would also indicate having not enough work can equally be a stressor for individuals, but that might be an individual difference. The extent to which you feel you have control over the decisions that you make in your organisation or about how you carry out your work is seen as being significantly important, and for some more than others. So for me, autonomy is really important. That's my big issue. If I feel as if I'm being micromanaged from the surrounding individuals in my team or organisation, that has a negative impact on me. The concept of support, and this is where we see lots of well-being programs. So this is where you might see the yoga sessions, the mindfulness sessions. This might be about giving a gym membership if you're fortunate enough to work for a large organisation. Talk about relationships and how they're built, your role, your clarity. Do you know what you're expected to do? Do you know to what standard and when? And I think this is a real issue for the sector at the moment, where we're seeing roles being merged with other roles as a function of restructures. The clarity you once had perhaps is no longer there. So demand that clarity if you're on the receiving end of an organisational restructure. And then, of course, there's change, which, we all love and adore. So the reason I think it's important to understand these factors is these are the factors the organisation is in control of. And absolutely, your relationship with these will be affected by who you are as an individual, but it's these factors that the organisation can control. So you can use these factors to support individual risk assessments, so where you might feel there's a disharmony. You can use this if you're a manager in the audience to reflect on whether your own professional managerial practice is contributing to perhaps less than positive environments. And certainly, why not use this as a team analysis if you've got a team build to talk about these different elements and have an exploration about what is working and what isn't working, rather than waiting until an individual has to say, I'm sorry I can't come in today because it's all too much. This is the organisational responsibility. So with that in mind, I want to hand over to Will, who will introduce himself and talk about a particular group of workers and colleagues that perhaps are at the front of the coalface, literally, and may well be affected by these factors more so. Thank you. I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Tamsin. Hello, my name is Will Tregaskes. I am co-founder of Front of House and Museums. Front of House and Museums was founded by myself and my former colleague, Abby Godfrey, in 2017. The group came about due to our seeing a lack of representation of front of house workers in the museum sector in general, and a sense that front of house workers felt undervalued and underrepresented in the wider museum sector. Our work initially started with advocating on social media, highlighting what good practice looks like, and it moved into a research element in 2018, 2019, where we started surveying the museum sector to understand what differences existed between front of house and back of house, but also collating and seeing what it showed against the whole sector. And what we found that there was a distinct difference between those who identified as working in front of house and those who were working back of house. We were finding that front of house are more likely to feel undervalued, underrepresented, and less likely to continue to work in the sector. To the extent that when we surveyed in 2019, 73% of front of house workers felt they weren't able to influence museum practice in their organisation, 52% wanted to leave the sector, and over 50% felt undervalued. This highlighted the challenges front of house faced, and as we all know, in 2020, that became in a whole different sense as well. Throughout this last 2 years since we carried out that research, we've seen front of house at the front of the COVID pandemic. Firstly, adjusting visitors' experiences in 2020, going on to furlough and facing a wide range of different experiences. Some were some front of house were working on the COVID frontline, working in testing centres, working in vaccination centres during the pandemic. Others were redeployed across the organisation, and many were furloughed. And we do know that many were also, unfortunately, made redundant or contracts not renewed. And this highlighted a need to represent front of house. And in 2020, we approached the MA following a coronavirus conversation focusing on front of house about establishing a charter of change following being highlighted by the MA's director, Sharon Heal. We came together with the MA to start talking about creating a charter for change. The charter for change was developed over just over a year period between 2021 and 2022. In this charter, we came together, we brought together a working group formed of people working in the sector, myself, Abby, Tamsin, and we sort of developed the idea and what it meant. We consulted the front of house. We quickly identified that this whole charter had to be led by front of house who worked in the sector, people who understood their experiences from that innate organic position through lived experiences. Without representing those diverse voices, the charter would never be able to grow and fully reflect the different needs of the sector. Over time, we formulated and created, I'm moving into Tamsin's section now, I think a little bit, and ultimately look to understand how we can disseminate and put in place best practice to get front of house more involved and make sure those stats, which I talked about in 2019, don't come back again. Because if you've got a sector which relies on the public and 73% of your staff don't feel they can influence them and change a museum for the better of public engagement, you have a problem when in reality museums are nothing but storage units if you don't have front of house and you don't have people to keep your collection safe and engaged. So I'm now going to hand over back to Tamsin to talk about some of the research processes involved.
We're keeping it interesting for the tech in the side. So let me just talk a little bit. So these are the aims. These are our outputs and outcomes. So what we want to do is create a charter. It's published, it's on our website. Please visit, please read. We also want to make sure that it's not a piece of research that happens in the sector that then gathers dust. I've been around the block a few times, that a piece of research is done and then literally we move on to the next piece of research. So we've got a 12-month implementation plan where we're adding additional layers of information, tools and resources. We are going to keep this conversation going. We want to make sure that the end point, if there ever will be one, is that the sector understands the experience of front of house colleagues to a much greater degree. They're committed wherever possible for equity for front of house colleagues, and that the general experience of work is improved. In terms of research methods, and again, I'm not going to read through every single slide, but we adopted a questionnaire. We got a really good response rate, higher than we anticipated, 344 responses. The learning here is perhaps to do more quantitative items rather than qualitative, is all I would say. We had lots of lovely rich data. What we then did is analyse the rich data, and we came up with some response themes that we wanted then to test more widely. So the feedback we got was grouped under sort of these 7 themes based on the analysis of the data. And we tested that on Museum Hour. We wanted to make sure that we were going to triangulate that data. So we tested that in August 2021, just to double check to see if those themes resonated, if there was anything else we should be adding. It also gave us an opportunity to get some more quantitative data. So we put some polls in place. So we got some ideas around what the most important things were. So recognition was the most important thing that front of house colleagues said they didn't get. So they might well be in a celebration situation, or they might be in a lift, but they wouldn't be recognised or praised for their work. They wouldn't be named. It would be everybody else. That's why it's so lovely and heartening to see the inaugural award yesterday for front of house workers and colleagues. They highlighted that their treatment in the pandemic had been patchy. So the questionnaire said 40% said it improved, but 29% said it had improved at this point. They felt that if an employer signed up to the front of house Charter for Change, it would make them more attractive. They're more likely to apply to a museum organisation if you are signing up to these practices and these principles. They also said that if things don't change in their organisation, 68% of these people are going to leave within a year. So that's a significant amount of turnover. And then also around the sense of performance and commitment, if their organisation signed up to this and changed the way in which they operated, 98% of people said that they would be more committed and they would make a higher contribution. So there's some real gains there. We wanted to test all of our research, so we drafted the charter and tested it in September with front of house colleagues and managers, which was interesting. We don't have time to go through it now. And then we tested the final draft in February 2022. So I'm now going to hand over back to Will, who's going to talk about the 5 principles of practice and our recommendations. Over to you.
So coming and sort of trying to bring together recommendations which could apply to any organisation across the UK is quite a challenge, from thinking about the size of the organisations to the diversity of roles within front of house. So it's both adjusting both for an organisation which might have a staff team of 4 to a staff team of thousands, but also reflecting a wide range of roles within front of house when you take in that wider understanding of front of house as being anyone who engages with front of house, with the public, or works to make the public, or works for the visitor experience. So we have to understand that each organisation is different. There's different processes in place. There's different staffing structures. Every organisation is on a different part of like a funding cycle or organisational structure. We have to be flexible. We have to understand the different contexts of the organisation. We have to look at make sure and get organisations to start moving. There's no point having recommendations which no organisation is going to adopt, because it's far beyond what the current window of acceptability is. So working as a team, we came together with these themes and started discussing how and what they are and how they can be applied to organisations across the UK. We came up and looked again to get those organisations involved, so maybe taking some of them first and moving and growing, and eventually we came to 5 principles of practice: wellbeing, contracts and conditions, recognition, inclusion, and professional development. I'll save wellbeing for a bit, and I'm just going to talk about that in a bit more detail. Contracts and conditions, that's, for example, ensuring that the right contracts are in place. If you don't need to give a 0-hour contract, don't give one. Paying the right level, paying the real living wage, for example. Putting in place the measures which make sure your staff feel confident and secure so that they can thrive in their role. Equally, that will also improve well-being. I'm sure many of you here know the stress which happens as a result of short-term contracts or seasonal work. If you can avoid those, it reduces stress. Recognition. Recognizing achievements of front of house, just like last night M&H had for the first time a front of house team award. Putting in place those recognitions from that high national level to recognizing the achievements of your staff team in your museum on a daily basis. Saying thank you, saying hello to your front of house staff team as you go around. I can't believe I have to say that to a museum sector. Like, just say hello. It shouldn't be something I have to say, but that's the sort of thing which we've highlighted and shows you where we're starting from. Inclusion. Who would think of not including front of house in the discussions around a new exhibition, a new development? That's some of the feedback, again, we found. People not being recognised for their expertise, for their knowledge. So bringing them into team meetings, that's an incredible part, but also making sure that those team meetings take place at suitable hours. For example, for shift work in front of house, during normal opening hours, it may not be possible for a front of house team to join that all-team meeting, or doing it out of hours, or allowing staff members to take a break whilst on that shift to attend the meeting. Utilising their expertise, recognising where they have specialism, for example, in that visitor experience, or even recognising some of their experience they perhaps bring with them, which enhances their role. There's much more on the website, I should add, in terms of those examples. Professional development. Thinking about how you can support the front of house team to develop, recognising you need to support them to attend that training within the staff paid time, but also recognising how that can support their progression, putting in a clear and transparent route of progression within the organisation and within the sector. And well-being. Well-being is overarching. All these factors contribute to the well-being, and these are all sector-wide, organisational-wide well-being issues potentially. Thinking about how, as I said, about contracts and conditions, about how the fact that a staff member may ignore you in your own place of work. Thinking about how you're included, and how you've been refused professional development. Those issues are all going to impact your well-being, and it's reflected in the research on why people are leaving a sector, why we see people being undervalued. For the project, we define well-being as a state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. Well-being is affected by our experience of life and our experience of work. While we often look at well-being from an individual employee's perspective, good workforce well-being is an indicator of a healthy and productive organisation. If your values of your organisation are progressive, we need to see it in the staff and how you support them to thrive and succeed. And you'll see that repaid in kind through the work and energy of your staff team. A couple of examples from what we've identified as examples. These are by no means the only recommendation. There's many more each organisation can do, and as you're saying, it's a very individual thing for organisations to go through to understand. The first one is staffing levels. Do not place a collection, visitors or colleagues at risk. Think about the staffing needed to successfully open your museum to a public, as an example there. Give enough time for staff to complete tasks with undue pressure to deliver, making sure that it is realistic and that what you're delivering to your staff is possible. Ensure resources are prioritised to address the improvement needs. For example, repairing facilities or interactives which may cause visitor complaints. We all know those challenges and the need to maintain them, but those do improve visitor experience. For example, if a water fountain is broken in the staff room, getting that fixed. The staff members really need that, as it is a way to keep hydrated during the day, particularly when you're on your feet all day or working in galleries. You need that opportunity, and you need the water, essentially. It's quite simple. Feedback. When the front of house give feedback, take it seriously. Don't dismiss it. Don't, for example, assume that the front of house is to blame. Understand and take your time. Listen to them, understand the issues, for example, where vandalism and trespassing take place, or where there's concerns around front of house safety. Think about front of house colleagues and being supported in those demanding situations. If there's a security issue, take it seriously. Front of house are exposed. And we've seen the risks. We saw in America, New York, where a front of house worker was assaulted in the front of house environment. Those risks are real. And as we are moving forward, we need to think about those risks. We need to put in place those plans to ensure staff safety, particularly in organizations doing work which might provoke a response. For example, decolonization is a prime example where front of house are going to be at the very front of any kind of issue at the museum. Put in place risk assessments for these potential risks. Think about how staff can be protected, how you can minimize the risk of staff members. Maybe that means one additional staff member on site. It's those changes which will ensure that staff feel safe and well. Physical well-being. Think about those barriers which are in place for front of house staff members. For example, we had reports of staff members not being allowed to sit down in galleries, not being allowed to take a bottle of water around with them whilst on display, working around galleries. If you're working at a desk, you have easy access to water. You could just go to a coffee machine, get coffee or water. Front of house workers need that access as well. Think about the amount of talking you're doing, particularly like, for example, a tour guide, for example, or someone on the front desk. Having water right next to you is essential. And think about when the volunteers and front of house staff members take a break. What are the conditions when they take a break? For example, we had examples of people having to sit in their car to eat lunch, not because they had no dedicated staff area to consume their food in and take out a break. You need to put in place appropriate place for staff to come to, rest and recuperate. It's the same for example, uniforms. Provide appropriate clothing. You work at an outdoor organization, provide a suitable coat. Those sort of things. Those little things are simple, and that's, I think, what's so important about the Charter, is that these changes are not necessarily big things. They are, in many ways, simple. For example, allowing staff members to take water bottles around with them. That's an easy change you could do on Monday. That's so easy, but equally there are larger things with more structural which we need time to put in place and change. That's why this charter has been designed. It's designed to reflect every organization. You can look at it, reflect on it, and put in place your plans to improve how you treat your front of house staff and improve their well-being through creating a more friendly and more inclusive workplace. So do read recommendations. You can find them all on the Museum Association website. You can find them on the workforce portion of the website itself. Please continue conversation when you go back to your organizations. Talk to your front of house teams, your front of house managers, everyone at your organization about how you can improve the experience of any worker. A lot of these things could be applied to any part of an organization. Signpost the research, share good practice, provide case studies to us so we can show to organizations across the UK what good practice looks like. And we need surveys, staff surveys, research is needed as well. We need to think about how we continue to grow and understand whether front of house experiences are improving or deteriorating. We need to understand how, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact front of house workers. And email the Museum Association, email Tamsin to share and find out more. So I will now hand back to Tamsin.
Brilliant. Am I on? So with 15 minutes to go, what am I going to cover? So I just still want to remind you, I want to challenge you to think about what is it about your own behaviours that may or may not be contributing to other people's experience of work. So taking that burden off that individual. And hopefully you can see the slide with the cup on. Is that right? Still there? Fantastic, just checking. So very briefly, because we didn't have an M&H show for the last year or 2 years, I just want to highlight the Sticks and Stones research. Really happy to talk about this at much greater length, but I want to give this an overview. And the reason I'm giving this as an overview is that whilst we've just heard about the factors that affect well-being in front of house teams, Sticks and Stones is a far more specific experience of work. And we did this piece of research in 2020. And again, we got a really high response rate. 510 people responded, explaining around their experiences of being bullied in the sector. We have got a full research report and recommendations on our website. In exactly the same way, we wanted to raise the profile of bullying in the sector, and we know just by having the articles and starting this research, so many people felt seen for the first time, that it wasn't just them, that actually this is something that's significant for the sector. We came up with some very clear definitions of what bullying meant, and we observed those, and it informed our research. The really important thing was that we were clear that whenever we're talking about bullying that's affecting the well-being of individuals, perhaps in this audience, I'm not going to highlight that, but certainly I am or was a target of bullying, is that bullying is conscious. So people do this on purpose with a malevolent objective, and it's sustained over time. So this is not about me being a manager coming in, having a bad day and perhaps nipping at you. This is a particular programme of work, and there is detrimental impact on the individual. We also changed the language. Often you might hear the concept of being a victim of bullying. That's not fair. That again puts the burden on the individual. So we use terminology like target, because that's what it is. And the person doing it is not a bully, they're a perpetrator. That's how significant it is. So lots of this research is on our website. And what we focused on, which is why I just want to share these two slides, well, what do bullying behaviours look like? How do you know you might be on the receiving end of a perpetrator's bullying behaviours? Reminding yourself, as I've said, that this is conscious, sustained, malevolent and detrimental to your well-being. And these are just some of the examples that we ask people to comment on. Now, don't worry, someone said, oh, well, maybe it's just banter. Well, what do you mean by banter? So there are a whole raft of bullying behaviours that I think is important for us to acknowledge. And I would really challenge all of you to think about the extent to which you may unconsciously behave like this rather than consciously. The key findings were not hugely surprising, but still very sad. You're more likely to be bullied by your direct line manager. The most common bullying behaviours were around being overly critical, the concept of micromanagement, or undermining people in public. 25% of our respondents felt that they were being bullied as a result of a protected characteristic, and that was primarily being a woman rather than being a man, and that was followed very clearly by age, both young and old, so it wasn't just polarised either end, and then also by disability. There were also other impacts, psychologically and physically. So 95% of respondents felt that their psychological well-being was compromised, as well as their physical health. There was also a lack of trust in their own organisation's processes and commitment, and 13% of people only raised a grievance as a function of that lack of trust. They felt the HR department was far more focused on protecting the organisation than protecting the individual. 90% of respondents were not satisfied with any of the outcomes. Now, I should say this is not just a function of our sector, this is generalisable across all sectors, but I think it's important for us to note. And as a result of this, 44% of people stopped working in their own organisation and 11% left the sector. And for me, this is the real rub here, is we want to diversify the sector, yet we know that 25% of people were affected by a potentially protected characteristic. Why are we not doing something about individuals' treatment? So, there are lots of recommendations, and we put recommendations at 5 different levels. So what do sectors and organisations have to do? If you're a line manager, what do you have to do? If you're a target, and we thought long and hard about whether we should put in recommendations for them, do we expect them to change their behaviour? But we've got hints and tips about record keeping, witness statements, sending emails home, looking at a whistleblowing policy in advance. Look, all of these things are all in our recommendations. And then we also put in recommendations for the perpetrators, because we thought, how do we change behaviour in an organisation? We change behaviour in an organisation by involving everybody in the tent and not othering and excluding people. So have a look online, have a look at the report, the PDF, and the recommendation checklist that you too can do in your own organisation. And all of that other stuff. So in my final few minutes, before we are able to answer a few questions, because we're finishing at 4:25, just want to highlight why wellbeing is so important for the sector and why wellbeing is so important for the MA. It's really important for the MA. It's one of our workforce campaigns for 2022. So if you have an idea about how we can campaign more effectively on your behalf as individuals and also to hold the sector to account, please let us know. If you want to find out more about wellbeing, it's a particular strand in our November conference, which will be happening in Edinburgh. No plug there. Look at our website for more details. But from a wellbeing perspective, we do have open source material. So we have a wellbeing hub with a variety of different sections and toolkits and reflections and resources. We also, during lockdown, I don't know if anyone was a participant here, we opened 2 Facebook groups to support individuals during lockdown. These are open to anybody, so you don't have to be a member of the Museums Association. They're coming to a close at the end of May, but they're going to be reconfigured, so there's going to be a dedicated Facebook group for workforce wellbeing in the sector, where we'll put in hints and tips and support ideas. There's still content, existing content. This was the coronavirus conversation from July 2020 about workforce wellbeing and what the sector needs to do. And then if you are the person that thought you were suddenly going to have a magic wand to affect your overall arching personal wellbeing, we also have resources on our website about those workshops. How do you deal with uncertainty? How do you manage your wellbeing space? Lots of other resources exist. Health and Safety Executive, CIPD, Glam Cares. I don't know if any of you were with the Glam Cares mix yesterday, so I'm a member of that steering group. So lots of stuff there. So, to close, we've covered a lot of ground. We want to make change. We want to support the sector to change. So you might want to think about what's helped you and your well-being. That's great. Think about what's worked for you and how you can seek that out. You might want to think about what else others could do, and that could be your line managers, it could be your senior management team, it could be your trade union, whomever. What is it that they could do to be helping you, rather than you having to think about what you need to do to help you? And please do let us know how we can help. Share that with others, share it with them, and then email me. Thank you very much for your time. The end.
Thank you very much, Tamsin and William. I must admit, I'm quite relieved. I did think we might be doing yoga in this session. So, any questions or responses to what you've heard? Yes?
Hello. I'm hoping you're largely preaching to the converted with this audience. So I wanted to know, what can we do in the campaign to make senior management value front of house, which is exactly where the value is not being recognised, right?
Do you want, from your perspective, then mine, go.
I think one of the areas we've seen really good feedback from is getting those senior managers taking time out of their normal day to work on the front desk, for example. To get that experience, see the challenges from there. Is also highlighting the chart of change and looking at those process and showing the evidence for those issues. I think it is incremental. We have to demonstrate the need for it, and I think the Charter has shown so many issues highlighting the sector and how it can benefit. We've got to demonstrate that value, and it's that added on value from adjusting how you currently operate.
Yeah, and we're just approaching a 12-month implementation plan. So we've just sent it to all of our institutional members. That's 3,000 members. We're just emailing specifically movers and shakers within the sector that we want them to respond to the Charter. And then what we are going to be doing later on in the summer is going out to people and say, do you think you can sign up in principle to at least the idea that we want to be moving in this direction, in a similar way that you might do for kids and museums or other climate action. So we want people to sort of say, yeah, do you know what, count us in? But what's really important is that we appreciate that everyone is on a journey. And I think we have to acknowledge that museums and organisations are so diverse, we can't apply one size fits all. That would be the detriment of everybody. So we want people to do as much as they can do, because any move in the right direction is a move in the right direction. So yeah, but share it widely. Say, oh yes, this sounds like a perfect case study for front of house Charter for Change. Have you seen front of house Charter for Change? Any of those things, that would work amazingly.
Thank you. Any more questions? No? Yes? Okay, so this, the one before?
Yeah.
That one?
That one? That's the one, isn't it? Yeah. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook page. Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Certainly in a lot of the work I do, which is around customer and visitor experience, the statistics around the costs of employees being unhappy and leaving, or if you turn it on its head, the impact on profitability, or let's call it sustainability of the organisation, of happy, productive, valued employees, are absolutely compelling, you know, and that's recognised in all sectors, but also not recognised in all sectors. So I think, you know, the work that you're both doing is incredibly important, and obviously you would like people to engage with you. So please do engage with them.
And if you want copies of the slides, please let me know. Tamsin at museumsassociation.org. I can send you the PDF, and if you want us to come and speak, we'll happily speak to anybody if you have any inroads in organisations. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for talking.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thank you. Okay, well, that's it, folks. Just before we say a final thank you to Tamsin and William, just wait for it. Just to say, it's been a brilliant 2 days, hasn't it? I'm hugely grateful to the organisers, to Anna and her team. Within this theatre, we've been very well looked after by Clemmy over there and Tom. And I thank all of you for coming to these talks, for listening, for contributing. And I'm sure going away with lots more new ideas, lots more new connections, friends, and lots more work to do to make the sector really, as I call it, build forward better. So thank you. Travel safely. See you next year. And once again, thank you very much to Tamsin and William.